And then good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I thank you most sincerely for the opportunity I have to share a few thoughts on Ghana's economic development, agenda and challenges. So specifically, we're looking at Ghana's experience and challenges in transforming its economy and society into one that is inclusive and sustainable. Ghana has been touted as what? A great example of the good that can be achieved pursuing what? Economic development models. And when it comes to the economy, we're particularly excited about what? GDP. Of course, we all know that GDP is not a good measure of sustainable success, but then it is an indicator of what? The value of goods and services produced in an economy. So we want to look at Ghana's GDP, see what benefits we derive as a people from the growth that we have achieved. I'm picking on this topic because in 2011, Ghana achieved a spectacular GDP growth of 14.4% on the back of what? The newly discovered oil. But in the last decade or so, our GDP growth has hovered around an average of 6.5%, which is quite good, and indeed can transform any economy. But we still are confronted with challenges of what? Unemployment, social vices. So what is it that is creating that difficulty? My research has shown that the growth that we have in GDP is not driven by local economic factor inputs. And that is what I want us to interrogate. Significant growth in our GDP, but then who is contributing to that input is a critical issue that needed to be what? To be drilled down and investigated. And if we are able to do that, we then would have a model that would help the rest of Africa to achieve the sustainable and inclusive government that we desire for ourselves. And of course, talking about factor inputs, basically we're looking at what? Land, capital, enterprise. Before then, let's set a premise. Let's look at some statistics. The services sector in Ghana is the key contributor to the GDP, to Ghana's GDP. Services contribute 50% of Ghana's GDP. And in 2012, the services sector grew by 10.3%. This was followed by the industrial sector. The industrial sector contributed 27.3% to Ghana's GDP in 2012 and grew at the rate of 7%. So services contributed 50%, grew at the rate of 10.3%. Industrial sector contributed 27.3%, grew at 7%. Agriculture contributed 22.7%, grew at a measly 1.3%. Meanwhile, agriculture is the dominant sector of the Ghanaian economy, employing a minimum of 50% of the labor force. So, if we have a significant growth in the services sector, made up of banking, insurance, real estate, and it is impacting on the dominant sectors of agriculture and industry, we should be able to impact the social livelihoods of our people, all things being equal. But unfortunately, that is not the reality on the ground. It is not the reality on the ground because the drivers of the growth that the services sector achieved or has been achieving are external to the Ghanaian economy. I work with a finance house. In fact, I've been in banking for 22 years. And banks in Ghana tend to be allergic. We tend to have some allergy for local business. We support import business because they have shorter cash flow generating what? Capabilities. So that the growth that you are seeing in the services industry is driven to a very large extent by what? Import business. So we finance a lot of imports. And if you look at the composition of the imports that we finance, they are goods that the local agricultural industry should be producing, like rice, like tomatoes. We import huge volumes of food items from outside. So that is what is feeding into the growth that we've been experiencing in the services industry, i.e. banking, finance, insurance, real estate. So the benefit, the catalytic benefit that should inure to our economy deriving from the growth in the services industry is accruing to what? The external factor contributors, i.e. farmers based outside Ghana. Because as you import more food, you are voting for more units of that food to be produced. And those who produced that food would get the benefit of what? Employment. At the expense of what? Local factor contributors. So local farmers, local fisher folks are having difficulties with what? They are farming. Because they go to the bank, because they have to depend to a very large extent on the vagaries of the weather. No irrigation. Agriculture in Ghana is rain-fed. So that you go into a bank for a loan facility and you're unable to pay because your crops did not do well. So next time when you go to the bank, your track record has been what? Challenged. So obviously the bank will not be encouraged to give you more money. But then when the importer goes to the bank, they are able to show you their impressive track record. Last year, I took $500,000. I was able to pay it back. So obviously, I am qualified to get more money. So this is gradually pushing out the local economy to the level where we become so dependent on what? Foreign imports. And this is also stifling the industrialization process that we have to transform our raw materials through the process of what? Beneficiation, which we need to help in the effective harnessing of our extractive commodities. So that the disconnect that we have in the key sector, the major sector now, as I've explained, is what? The services sector. But then there's a disconnect between the services sector and dominant sectors of what? Agriculture and industry. And this, it's putting a lot of pressure. We're not producing much, and it's affecting our balance of payments. If you look at the trading area of the balance of payments, it's perpetually in deficit because we are exporting less and then we are importing more. And because we are not adding value to our exports, they are subject to what? Unfair terms of what? Trade, which again affects the value of export revenues that we earn for our country. we have to look for money somehow to pay for our huge appetite for imports. The pressure that is being put on government is pushing the government to borrow to meet the shortfall in our export revenue. So you have a situation where the lure of by all means attracting foreign exchange is getting the government to perpetually sign off our cocoa receipts to what? Donors or partners, if you so wish to call them so. And what's happening in the cocoa industry is this. Because we have incessant desire or appetite for foreign currency to meet the deficit in our reserves, foreign exchange reserves, we go in to borrow money year on year to finance cocoa production. Now, once the money comes in, this year we got $1.5 billion from a consortium of banks, offshore banks, not local banks, offshore banks. So that the foreign currency hitting your reserves improves temporarily your foreign exchange situation. And then we are happy. We pop champagne. Oh, we've done very well. So you harvest your cocoa beans, and these have been mortgaged to the foreign banks that provided you that foreign currency. Now, because you've not added value to the cocoa beans, the opportunity of beneficiation is lost on your economy. You are effectively shipping off potential jobs to those who contributed that money ensuring your foreign reserves. Let's come home. So we've looked at the balance of payments, the effect of the structural imbalance in our GDP vis-a-vis our balance of payments. Let's look at our domestic, the fiscal situation. The democracy that we practice is also having a toll on our economy. We have election cycles and their impact on effective economic management of our economy. Every 4 years, we want to exercise our franchise. So government expenditure goes up. The reason why government expenditure goes up is that the electorate see it as an opportunity to exact projects from the government during election years. So government is compelled to increase its expenditure beyond tolerable limits. And this puts a lot of pressure on what? The budget. Last year, Ghana exceeded its budget by a whopping 8.7 billion cedis, minimum of about $5 billion. That is huge. As a result of what? Competitive pressures coming from what? Elections. Now, this pressure on your budget limits the extent to which you can strategically transform the fortunes of people imbibing what? Economic development models. I must say sustainable economic development models. So we're starting with a huge deficit in our what? Fiscal space. So your fiscal space becomes so small, you don't have room for new development. So what do you do within such an environment? You go a borrowing. I'm sure you heard it. We floated a Eurobond that gave us $1 billion. And the euphoria that characterized receipt of this money, because government was virtually on its knees because we did not have space in the budget to undertake any project. So, and then there was a lot of pressure coming from people, contractors who have done work for the government. They need their money. So that this 1 billion came in. Now it has given us what? A new lease of life, albeit temporarily, because the structural defect in our system is not being tackled. Solutions. Is it a basket case? I would say not at all. We have a huge potential to reverse the identified negative trends in our economic structure. I would want to pause for questions, or you want us to wrap it up before we take questions? Any questions up to this point before we look at some suggested solutions? Okay. So from the picture painted, it becomes so obvious, so critical that we approach the beneficiation issue with all seriousness, value addition. We need to add value to our natural resources. And indeed, we need to create a veritable link between the services sector and the key or dominant sectors of agriculture and industry. We need to look at that link. San was telling you about the research that I did on how America harnessed its natural resource base way back in the 16th century. They mainstreamed the natural resources sector, the extractive industry, into their main economy, social, cultural, and economics. So that as they exploit the natural resources, they are injecting the benefit into their economy. America did that using their own resources. What did Norway do? Norway said, we do not have the capacity in-house to be able to do this. So we're going to wait. We have expertise in shipbuilding. We are not ready yet. So they waited, developed, built local capacity, and when they were ready, they started. Look at Norway. It's a shining example. Ghana. The most important thing is to come to the realization that we have this structural defect, which can be cured through what? Local value addition. If you pick our cocoa alone, I'm ashamed to admit that I'm not a cocoa fan. I'm not a chocolate fan because I haven't developed the taste. I've developed the taste for tea, and we don't produce tea. So that's a huge opportunity, economic opportunity for our people. Children in our schools today. I said about the Ghana School Feeding Program, which the Dutch government was generous enough to help us institute. Wouldn't it be nice to feed our children with one hot chocolate a day so that they develop the taste for our cocoa? And then the continent of Africa, we have 1 billion odd population. Intra-African trade, yesterday I was saying it's below 5%. Sun tells me it's about 10%. Even if it is 15%, it's way too low. How do we integrate our economies within the sub-region, within the continent, to consume our products? So that at the level of the African Union, could we have an integrated arrangement such that we could put a cocoa production facility in Côte d'Ivoire or Accra, producing for the rest of the world, so that the capital that we will use for this would come from the 54 African states within, so we can take ownership of what? Our natural resources. And then we also need to build intellectual capacity of our people. Education. We need to deepen the role of education. UNESCO says that, and I agree with them, that education is the what? The passport to a good life. If we educate our people, if we enlighten our people, we will equip them with what society needs so that they will help us transform our economies, help us add value to our economy. We need to educate our people. So, value addition, encouraging locals to have what? Strong appetite for what they produce, and a need to integrate sub-regional and continental efforts at harnessing the natural resources that we have been so generously blessed with by the Creator. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for a short presentation addressing huge topics. It's quite impressive, because normally one would easily in a lot of dimensions. So you managed to condense a lot of questions and issues in a very short time. So maybe we need a few seconds to absorb, but at the same time there are probably reactions and questions. Who wants to start? Dieter?
Thank you very much. I think what you said makes absolutely a lot of sense.
Thank you.
But of course, this presentation should be made, first of all, to the responsible African politicians, to the government. What is the attitude of the Ghanaian government when they see the country has the potential to feed its people, and at the same time they see, as you said, that you import things which are perhaps slightly different from what you produce yourself, but you would have the potential. And the government has at least certain means to orient this development. And the government should not be satisfied with a country with your agricultural potential to be obliged to import a lot of things, perhaps a few exceptional things. Now, is there a problem of not understanding the problem? Is there a problem of political courage to protect and to develop the local potential? And there might be a link, which I have seen in other African countries, think of Senegal specifically, where the democratic development has led to a situation where in a presidential election the concern of the competitors, the political competitors, was so much to please the urban society and the urban electorate that they led, for example, in that case it was rice, they got much cheaper rice on the world market, not from Europe but from Southeast Asia. Yeah. And the campaign was about who offers the cheapest price. And that led to a situation where the investment we had been doing, of course at the request of Senegal, to develop in the Senegal River area where there is a lot of potential irrigated rice, but in fact it was a bit more expensive than the one which you could find. And no politician had the courage to say, I advise them, please protect, say the Europeans want to enter your market, but I said protect your market, because save the investment you have been made with our money, by the way, to produce your own rice and feed your people. And it turned out, I talked even to the president at that moment, who was Abdou Diouf, competing against Wade. Wade made the best offer for the price, and he won the elections. And in the last moment, Abdou Diouf also lowered his price. And I said, but Mr. President, you know that you cannot offer that price and in the same time save your own home production. And he said, what do you want me to do? I have to win this election, and if the other offers a cheap price, I do the same. But these kind of links between democratization, which can be a problem in that case, And the economic aspects of using the local potential might be a case. I just suggest.
Perfectly, because I brought in the political economy issue to show the pressure that most of our national leaders are under.
See, you are hard put to meeting what? Electoral promises. You want to capture state power. And you need resources to be able to do that. Your so-called development partners have money, which they are offering you. Now, that money they are offering you is what? An inducement for you to open up your economy and let them come in. You don't have the money to meet the needs and aspirations of your people. So the issue, the operating word there is sustainability. Now, if we want to sustain our economies, we have to get to the point where we say no. Ghana is not coming to an end tomorrow. It's a long distance race. And typical of a long distance race, you need to start gradually, build capacity. So there's the need for us to have some protection. But with our political leaders under pressure to deliver now in the short term, when they don't have the money, and then development partners offering the money subject to their doing things against their own people, that is the quagmire they find themselves in. So we need a strong leader who is selfless, who would say that, pardon my expression, the nonsense must stop. Nigeria did it. We will not allow people to import food, and they closed their border. China, the success story of China was because they said, look, we've closed our economy. We are going to produce and consume what we want. And then when they opened it up, they started exporting things that we said, oh, these are not of good value. And look at China today. They've built the capacity. So you can only build sustainable capacity if you try. But then if you are prevented from trying, if you are prevented from developing, produce your own food. Apart from giving jobs, you develop what? The capacity by learning from your mistakes and correcting these mistakes. That is the way to go. But if you are not given the opportunity, because your leaders would always have to pander to pressures from outside and from within, it will be a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
Very nice presentation. You know, trying to reconcile the dilemma of development and democracy and it's a trilemma with globalization, democratization, and development. One can sense the pressure of democracy because trying to get votes. But at the same time, I think in the equation, there is a component that must come in, and probably there's the systemic constraint for that component to come in and could provide a balancing force in a very practical and pragmatic way, without expecting every leaders to be a Deng Xiaoping. You know, not everyone would be a Deng Xiaoping. Okay. To be concrete, I mean, this is where business, if it is reasonably structured and can bring a voice that is listened to, it brings the dimension of but getting leaders to know that, look, we have to take care of the producer of the rice as opposed to the eater of the rice. And this brings some form of re-equilibrium, and which is fair. It's not a pressure from globalization, it's not a pressure from donors, it's a pressure from those who are producing the rice and not doing the business, providing the services, and they also vote. They're little, but people work with them and people see. That sort of I think thinking is extremely important as a way forward. You know, I think it goes beyond what we call the conventional public-private sector dialogue, but correcting or re-equilibrating the different forces so that in a very pragmatic way, by they working on improving business environment with the policymakers, working in terms of bringing some rebalancing act in the policy, in the economic policy, trying to bring some sense as opposed to instead of just be taking care of your vote bank, you take care of your producers in a way. So it brings it brings some form of re-equilibrium. Having said that, my question would be, to what extent is there a thinking being done, a bit to what Diti said, in terms of policy making process? Okay, economic policy making process is as important as looking at the substance of economic policies, you know. So the process is as important as the policy because they bring the corrective issue. I think that's not been very well substantiated in economic development thinking. Now it's catching up in terms of process, but Africa could provide a very interesting, let's say, platform to do that type of work. So in your work, probably the process of policy making will be as important in getting the right policies. Because you can have the right policy in the wrong process, you're dead. If you have the wrong policy in the right process, you can correct, which we've been doing. And that's very important.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sam. Raj, my good friend Raj.
Now, I think Ghana has done what you're talking about. You know, Ghana, realizing the situation in which we were in 2010, came out with the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda. Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda, where we had a 3-year strategy to boost agriculture production through what? Value addition. And they wanted to do this through a PPP arrangement. But then the strategy, as we have it, i.e. promote what? Agriculture as a strategy to spearhead the development agenda. When it came to implementation, they had serious implementation challenges that resulted in a minimum of $100 million being wasted just on one PPP project. So the challenge really has to do with what? Implementation. The commitment of the political class to implement strategies on paper. If you look at the Ghana Growth and Development Shared whatever, brilliant. But then when they began rolling it out, it was fraught with a lot of what? Implementation challenges. Today, the government has set up a committee to try and then what? Clean up the mess. So if we don't improve on the capacities of our people, reorienting them, I like the way you put it, to change the imbalance, political leadership would have to demonstrate the commitment to use the intellectual capacity available not only within the country, but then in the diaspora. We should look for the brain power, the best brain powers, put them together and let them what? Superintend implementation of the strategies that we put in place to arrest the challenges, the difficulties that we have. Yes.
I'm not sure where to start to follow on the specific question raised and specific observation. As you talk, basically, the Ghanaian experience you described to us
Yes.
is replicated across the continent. Whether it's agriculture, whether it's the role of banks, we're going through a similar experience. And my question really is that I like the way how you sketch the whole subject. It's a vast area. But what I'm looking for really is how you thought about networking across the continent. This is a kind of a gospel you are presenting, and I think there is a urgent need for sharing. We need champions who will take on this particular role and share across the continent. We talk about local value addition, but really it's like a phrase. It's not built on substance. So how do we deepen the message through networking? And I want to talk to you about the possibility of getting you to Namibia to meet colleagues on the ground who are engaged in similar projects, because we need to take it up in a big way.
In fact, if I just add one sentence to the question of Peter, when we talk about value addition, you talk about local value additions, but you also talk about regional dimension. What would be the interest for Ghana of having value addition on the cocoa being done in Ivory Coast? Don't you have political economy problem there?
Sure. Okay, great point. What we're doing at the level of the Institute of Diplomatic Practice and Development Policy is to influence decision on the continent. We have programs with the African Union. We train their budget business group.
Council department, budget officers, and we beginning is the need for a change in mindset. The theme for AU's 50 years anniversary is what? African Renaissance and Pan-Africanism. So when we're talking of Renaissance, we're thinking about what? Rebirth. Rebirth that will recognize the value that we have as a people, as a continent. So we want to influence the strategic direction of what? The policy environment within Africa. Now, the reason why we're talking about integrating our economies is that the challenge that we have is that if you're dealing with Ghana, if you're dealing with Côte d'Ivoire, we have small, insignificant markets that in economics would not inure to the benefit of what? Citing huge projects. But then if we look at the continent as one market space, and we integrate our economy, we appeal to the local leadership, and they buy into the message. And we set up a plant in Accra or Dar es Salaam or wherever based on what? Economies of scale. And we are producing primarily, watch my word, we are producing primarily for the local market, because that is what should drive our development agenda. We'll be making progress. Because if we are going to be fragmented, Ghana doing it, we would not get the volumes. Because the more you produce, the lower your unit cost. So economies of scale and scope would have to come in. That's why we are calling for what? The bigger picture, to look at the bigger picture. So there'll be the need for us to what? To canvass for support at the level of what? The African Union, at the level of what? Regional economic what? Blocks. At the level of ECOWAS, SADC, and then the others. So that we see, in Africa, the visions we have are artificial. There's the urgent need for us to integrate our economies so as to give us that leverage we need to produce more. Otherwise, we can never compete with a global market giant like China, because their cost of production is so low. Bottom line is the cost of production, the unit cost concept.
You're preaching to the converted. I know my colleague Bruce wants to ask questions.
Okay.
But I cannot resist just pushing you a bit on this question. I have just two related. One is, why is the private sector I would say in general in Africa, so silent on the project of boosting intra-Africa trade and the continental free trade FTAs and so on. It's captured by an elite of trade policy makers that have that vision, but it's hard to see on the ground the support from the private sector. The second, and that's maybe related to the first point, is that I'm just keeping up your example of cocoa beans and Ghana and Ivory Coast, to some extent, you're competitors. So if you have an integrated market and the production of value addition of your cocoa beans is in Ivory Coast to add value addition to have chocolate, if that would be integrated market, all the benefits of the value additions would accrue to Ivory Coast, not to Ghana. So will not the government of Ghana, following your arguments that you were saying, oh, we need to protect our market, restrict the trade of cocoa beans to prevent that value addition to happen in Ivory Coast and to keep it in Ghana? How do you reconcile these two?
Good. First and foremost, the role of the private sector. The private sector, cost of doing business is so high because of what? The identified structural rigidities. There's a lot of lobbying from the private sector in Ghana.
Pushing the envelope to get the government to sanitize the environment so as to reduce the cost of doing business. But at point, yes.
Can I just, sorry, I had to come in on your reply to Sam.
Yeah.
On that, do you have a view on that? Is work being done in a structured manner? It's beyond lobby. It's doing things to improve the overall business environment. Would you have a view on the process through which private sector and policymakers are working to reduce the transaction costs or to improve the business environment?
Sure. In Ghana, we have the Private Enterprise Foundation. We have the Association of Ghanaian Industries. We have Association of Bankers. These groupings come in to put a lot of pressure on government because doing business in an environment that is so hostile, in an environment where you have macroeconomic indicators oscillating widely, makes it very expensive. So they are always putting pressure. Now we have a Monetary Policy Committee of Bank of Ghana. They determine rates. Now the rates that they come up with pushes interest rates so high. Now the reason why interest rates are so high has to do with the dynamics that we talked about earlier on. Now the unseen hand, as Adam Smith would indicate, forces of demand and supply determining, because if you are not producing to earn the revenue, obviously it will be reflected. In economics, you can't hide anything. It will be reflected in the prices that you pay. So that the private sector have become so frustrated. So that's what you are seeing. Look at the growth in agriculture. Look at the growth in industry. So if you allow the forces of demand and supply to come into play, we are going to deepen this services thing. So what we are doing, the government, it gets to a point where it appears that they've come to their wit's end. Because the pressures and willingly, they would want interest rates to come down. Who wouldn't want that? But do they have control? Do they? I don't think so. Because if you don't produce locally through this beneficiation issue that I'm talking about, if you do not increase your export potential to earn the foreign currency, and you have huge appetite for imports, you are going to pay the price through what? High interest rates, high exchange rate. So that one, the government would have very little to do. And mind you, the difficulties that we face has to also do with the structure, the reliance, the over-reliance that we have on international financial institutions. Borrowing. We borrow from the World Bank, the IMF, to shore up our destiny. And this borrowing is not foundationed in local economic reality. They borrow the money to waste it. So all this feed into what? The high cost of doing business. So we are caught in what? A never-ending cycle. But the solution, like we are saying, is that let's have a strong leader who would put in place institutions, and we should not be in a hurry, because in the short term, things are going to get worse. If we are saying that, and then coming to your second issue about the integration of the continent, once we come to the realization that as individual countries, we cannot do much, and that we needed to integrate our economies. If we have a production facility in Ghana, it will not belong to Ghana because the ownership would be collective. And then that one, we need to encourage the private sector.
The jobs will be in Ghana.
The jobs will be in Ghana, but then we would have other similar industries in other countries. You understand? We are producing. So the jobs will be in Ghana. We will have another industry set up in Côte d'Ivoire, another industry set up in Nigeria, but then we own it. But then government should not play. Government should just play the facilitation role and encourage the private sector to do the investment. One, the private sector is assured that when we produce, we can sell. They'll be encouraged to bring the capital. Once you produce, we can assure you, under a PPP model, the private finance initiative, and then the CC, the concession contracts. So we can have a PPP arrangement where we encourage what? Private investors to come in. We are going to create a propitious environment, produce, and we can assure you of what? The market. And there has to be some protection so that it may be in Accra, but it doesn't belong to Ghana. You have private people whom we are rolling the red carpet for to set up this processing facility with their own money so that the efficiency would come in. Because if government comes in, they will distort the dynamics. Government just facilitates it. The private sector comes in. They get whatever return, they take it away. You have jobs in there, you are transforming because the issue about aid and donor funding is an area that creates a lot of distortions. And when the private sector is coming in, they will go to the financial institutions to go and borrow against their own balance sheet. So that if you don't have the requisite balance sheet, the bank will not support you. And if the bank supports you, the bank would monitor to ensure that you achieve the desired objective to generate the required cash flows to pay.
Thank you. Nana, I'll give you the floor in 1 minute, but Bruce has been very, very patient. I work with him every day, so if
I may take a long time.
I'll suffer.
Yeah.
Well,
And after
very interesting presentation. So I've got it's quite thought-provoking. But maybe the last thing that you meant, or for me, the thing that was quite interesting was about implementation. So you mentioned this PPP project that had basically failed because of implementation, and you talked about political commitment. I mean, one of the things that we work on increasingly here is sort of trying to drill down underneath what this political commitment actually entails, and it's kind of more issues of interest and power and sort of who's actually driving and who's constraining and things like that. And to me that goes back to some of the dilemmas that you were talking about before. So the consumer, protecting the consumer or the producer, which is, do you need to protect the market, the producer, or do you need to have low prices for the consumer? And ultimately, the implementation is going to be the driver of what comes out of that. I mean, there's reports that we were reading on Tanzania, for example, about attempts to protect the rice market, but basically the political interest in keeping the Zanzibaris on side led to them allowing smuggling to take place. So you can imagine a similar thing in Ghana if in some way they manage to protect the market. Ultimately it comes down to implementation. Are they able to carry out the protection, and does that override their political concerns? I mean, that's maybe what you were trying to get at as well. But I mean, I wonder, underlying all this stuff, if we don't need to go beyond then this story about political commitment and much more saying, okay, given the kinds of stories that we have and the political understanding that we have, can we say more then about sort of these potential solutions of protection or not? I mean, so that's kind of the first thing. The second thing, I liked the way that you talked about the services sector and kind of focused on its disconnect from the rest of the economy. I mean, the service sector must still be a major employer it's a major employer within the economy, presumably. I think the issue is that it doesn't provide this value added. So does that make you think, therefore, I mean, what solution do you see then for linking the two up? I mean, at one end, presumably the cocoa sector relies quite a lot on the services sector. There's a lot of people that are making money in employment, etc., from cocoa transport, from service provision to those people that are sort of selling, trading the cocoa. So I wonder maybe if you can break down within the services sector, is there more that we can say, therefore, about which elements of the services sector are more detached from the productive sector than others, and therefore where some of the links it should be? I mean, you talked about the financial sector in particular, but I wonder sort of within that how important it is compared to other aspects of the services sector. And that, I mean, since you mentioned the kind of the foreign exchange issue.
I'm just aware of the time.
Yeah,
we can see him on Monday, and we have to stop
That's
really
true.
at 11.
Okay.
So maybe just focus
Well,
on
maybe the
most
final
important
bit would be
questions.
more kind of the process. I mean, the solutions then to these issues
Okay.
is really kind of, and what you came back to were things like investors. Okay, are we talking foreign investment or are we talking domestic investment? And ultimately it comes back then to this issue of the business environment. And if you link this business environment story back to the story of political will or political interest, within that context then how do you, can you go in more depth and say something more about where the solution might lie?
Okay. Yeah.
Ali, maybe just before you
Sorry,
answer,
not
because I'm
to
just
go
aware of the time, and Bruce, you have to be on Monday in Brussels. Then we'll have working to see how we can also push some of these issues further with Nana and
And
Alexander.
about what
But I suggest, just because we have the chairman of the board program committee and they meet at 11 and we have to be on time. So I suggest that we go with the last round of questions, Nana, Volker and Anna. And then you wrap up answering the questions, and
Right.
we can continue in the corridors for those that are not part of the board program committee, but the other ones have to stay here. You're
I
duty.
can withdraw my question because it was very similar to the one you asked about employment and about. So,
Yeah,
very short of time.
well, very interesting presentation. Thank you for the points you put. I was just wondering whether you think, or whether anybody in this room thinks it would be a good idea to reconsider the term of office given in our democratic governance as of now. You know, instead of the 4 years, we should think of giving them 6 years so that the rush or the pressure is reduced for them to do more sensible.
Just have two short questions. The first one is to what extent in your discussions about the investments in the Ghanaian economy, you figure in the potential of the Ghanaian diaspora with all the remittances. Because you talked about the aid money, you talked about the private sector, but there is potentially a good source outside. And you know, of course, about these discussions of setting up certain investment funds, so that the remittances not only go to the household, but that it is bundled. Yeah. And the other thing is to what extent now also with the oil production, there is a discussion about the setting up of a sovereign wealth fund. That is also under discussion in a number of other countries where natural resources are captured and possibly used for internal investments.
Okay, good, thank you. Perhaps I'll take the last one first. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, we have its variant called the Heritage Fund, where we put money aside to meet whatever. But then I have my, doubt, because the environments are different. The needs of Norway at the time they set up the sovereign
is different from ours. In fact, our challenge now is to take advantage of the local content thing that is coming with the oil industry. So how do we build the capacity of our people? Money should be put there, because if you're putting money aside for future generation and you're not securing the value, the quality of current generation, then I can assure you that their offsprings may not have the benefit of achieving that intellectual depth that we need. So today, let us invest in education. We have huge infrastructural deficit when it comes to education and other services. We should be putting money there to inject quality. That's a quick one. Now, the role of the Ghanaian diaspora, they transfer huge amounts into the economy and they support. I think that is the third contributor to foreign exchange, whatever. Not the fourth. We need to encourage that, but then we need to channel that more into investments. Now, talking about investors, investors should not have any color or coloration. Investors are coming with what? Funds to invest. So our strategies, our policies must be aimed at what? Attracting investment from the global investor community, whether they are Ghanaians or whatever. But the most important thing is that once you invest in Ghana, we should protect that investment to ensure that we achieve the desired objective of what? That investment, what? Moving to the next level. You should not invest and then we leave you to what? The walls of what? Global competition, and then your investment becomes what? Wasted. No, we need to protect you. And that brings us to the first point you raised about the political commitment. The commitment of the leadership. We should not be in a hurry. And now your question was the point of what? Possibly looking at the term of the presidency. They have 4 years, but I can assure you that they work for only 2 years. The first year they are settling in. Second and third year they will pretend to be working. The fourth year we are back campaigning. So really, nothing gets done. Do you understand? So we need to take a hard look to ensure that what we have sustainable strategies. Again, we have to have independent state institutions to be in charge of what? Strategic direction of our continent. Independent, it doesn't really matter who is in government. And these independent institutions should have their power from the Constitution. So that if our agenda is to do what? Beneficiation, the Constitution should give that power to an independent body. So that whether government P or A or Z is in power really would not matter what we are doing by way of what? Development. Because we have an independent institution guaranteed under the Constitution to work. I think that is very, very important. So that we stop this. Say again?
Why would people vote then if their leaders cannot change the course of development?
Now, when you come in, you see, we have this socialist inclined government, and then we have this capitalist inclined government. So that the strategies will be there. But then if you're a socialist inclined or oriented government, it depends on how you are going to implement the strategies. The strategies should not and must not change. It is the way, the implementation, the strategy of implementing that perhaps may change. But if what we are saying is that we want to enhance our agricultural value addition business, it has to be consistently done, irrespective of who is in power, whoever is in power.
Just a quick, those institutions, would they work towards a national or a continental agenda?
Come again?
Those institutions, independent institutions, would they work towards a national or a continental agenda?
The bottom line is the national first, because if individual states focus on fixing their national problems, the collective would inure to the benefit of the continent. Okay? The model is that fix your local problem. So that if you fix your local problem and I fix mine, we all fix our local problem, the collective would inure to what? Our collective benefit. But if we are looking at the bigger picture, we may lose out on the small. And our development would have to be people-centered. If we are talking about national development, we should link it to that individual. How do we ensure that we enhance the value of that individual? And the collective well-being of that individual is what would ensure that at the village level, at the district level, at the national level, at the sub-regional level, and at the continental level, we all move in a development-oriented environment, where on a daily basis we are adding value to ourselves. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander. Now you understand why when we met him we were very inspired and